And hello, ladies and gentlemen from across the Louisiana plain. Welcome to our platform where we are advancing constitutional principles, outing the rhinos, exposing the corruption, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. We are so grateful that you would choose to spend part of your day with us today. Thank you so much, each and every one of you, for joining us. And thank you for your generous support of the show. We are just blown away by the love and support that we've gotten, and we just can't thank you enough. Today, we will be continuing our election integrity series by having a conversation with the founder of Louisiana Conservatives, Christy Haik, who will give us a little peek behind the scenes of election integrity in Louisiana. We are really looking forward to that, but let's first take a look at the scripture of the day. Today's verses are Psalm chapter 33, verses 8 through 12. And it says, "With breathtaking wonder, let everyone worship the Lord, this awe-inspiring creator. He breathed words and worlds were birthed. Let there be, and there it was. Springing forth for the moment he spoke, no sooner said than done. With his breath he scatters the schemes of nations who oppose him. They will never succeed. His destiny plan for the earth stands sure. His forever plan remains in place and will never fail. Blessed and prosperous is the nation who has God as their Lord. They will be the people he has chosen for his own." The Lord was reminding me this morning that worship is the key to his heart. And this passage was such a great encouragement for me to take a breath. And I'll just encourage you to do the same. Take a breath, close your eyes, and just dwell on the bigness of the Lord. By his words, all that we see and that we don't see in creation was made. And at his words, nations rise and fall. So what do we have to fear? Worship should be our reflex because of the glorious God we serve. Worship resets our heart and our outlook on life, and worship positions us for God's protection and blessing. So if you are feeling anxious or stressed, or if you're feeling uncertain today, let this be an encouragement to you to default back to worship and see how the Lord lines things up for your benefit.
Wow, what a beautiful psalm. He shatters the schemes of those who oppose him. I noticed, Danielle, that it's not us who are shattering the schemes, it's the Lord who is shattering the schemes of those who oppose him. And if we are in a position of worship and homage to him, we are merely his instruments. It's his power and his glory. And that's what we should be focused on. And speaking of someone who is a real instrument for exposing corruption in our state, particularly as it relates to election integrity, it's such a blessing to have Christy Haik with us today. Few have done more in the past year, 18 months to advance election integrity in Louisiana. What a privilege to have you with us, Christy. How are you?
Hi, Christopher. Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your amazing show today. I'm doing very well. And I love that scripture, Danielle, that you read. It just reminds me of how, this is a nation that was formed with the motto, "In God we trust." And I think sometimes we forget that that is how our nation was formed. Our founding fathers trusted in God, even though the narrative has been skewed. And, the other side is saying they didn't believe. They absolutely believed, and you cannot rewrite history. And I love, Danielle, also that you spoke to maybe those in the audience who are feeling anxious. There are days when, we all feel somewhat anxious, but as long as our eyes are focused on him, then there is no fear and there should be no anxiety. So thank you for that verse.
Yeah, absolutely. And he fights our battles for us. And I think that's just such an important thing to keep in mind because, Christy, you're a warrior. We feel like we're here on the battlefield for the narrative, the battlefield for truth, and the battlefield for the future of our state. And if we think that we're doing it all in our own strength, that we're just going to fall short. We have, keeping in mind and just continually reminding ourselves that it's the Lord fighting our battle, it just makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
So very true. So very true. And Christy, you know, it's interesting as I've observed you on the political scene, you would never guess that a person observing you would never guess that you have not been involved in political advocacy, but for a couple of years now since the 2020 election. And you appear so fearless and so seasoned in what you do. How did you originally get involved in political advocacy in Louisiana?
Well, thank you for that, Christopher. I'm glad to know that I don't appear how I feel sometimes. That's
Makes two
nice.
of us.
Hardly.
Reassuring. Yeah, right, right. Well, it's interesting. I grew up not being a political person. My parents enjoyed politics. My mother especially was very involved, and I just always was not interested. But when I got to be a certain age, I was born and raised in Baton Rouge. I graduated from St. Joseph's Academy and LSU, and then I became a flight attendant, and I flew all over the country and the world. And I landed in Germany, and I lived in Germany for 20 years until I came back here in 2014. Having traveled the world and having lived in Europe for such a long period of time, I gained a very unique perspective on the freedoms that we enjoy here in this country. Because, you know, Germany is by no means a third world country, but they still do not enjoy the freedoms that we have in such abundance. And I became very concerned from the perspective of looking from another country at my own country of America during the Obama years, and even maybe a little bit before that, just seeing that the way that, you know, the country was moving. I mean, I said I was a flight attendant. Well, the first plane into the World Trade Center, I knew the captain who piloted it. And I remember having flown with him when I was still flying domestic. And the fight on terror had come to our shores. And so I also went to our nation's capital on January 6th and just wanted to be there to support our Constitution and our president. And of course, we all know that the narrative that came out of that day was patently false and absolutely nefarious. And that's more is being uncovered on that every day. But for the grace of God, sit any one of us who were there that day in the jail cells in DC, languishing and rotting because they're, you know, making up their own laws retroactively. It's quite interesting. So, anyway, after watching the 2020 selection, because we all know it was not a true election, I formed an election integrity group with Dr. Randy Russ, who you had on your show, I think just yesterday, a former CEO of Community Coffee, and John Scanlon, the former CEO of ETEL. We formed Louisiana Citizens for Election Integrity. And we brought a lot of national experts who were already doing the deep dive on our nation's elections in to look at specifically Louisiana's elections. And so we worked professionally and privately with our Secretary of State. And it's quite interesting, Danielle, because Christopher's wife and I, Katie Alexander, we had the very first meeting with Kyle Erdouin right after the election. And we came to him with a request, and the request was for him to select a few randomly selected machines from some different parishes. And we asked him to conduct a forensic audit on those machines. And he, of course, just looked like a deer in the headlights because, you know, nothing had been spoken of with regards to election integrity at that early stage in the game. So he didn't do that, but he continued to work with us.
Christy, was Secretary Ardouin resistant, obviously, to doing the forensic audit on the machines because he was not convinced that we have a problem with our machines?
Well, at that particular first meeting, he didn't say that there was no problem with the machines. He was more telling us that he has best people and best practices. And we had spoken with a guy named Chris York in Colorado who told us otherwise. And this is a very credible expert on elections. And that is why we wanted the meeting with Kyle in the first place. And what he did say was, if I find fraud in the audit and I find fraud in the last election, I'll have to decertify. And we said, well,
yeah.
yeah, but let's just cross that bridge when and if.
And that's of course, that is your job to do that if you find fraud in the voting machines. But let me ask you this, Christy. So to make it clear to our listeners, it was really the 2020 election and the irregularities that you saw in 2020 that prompted you to dive headfirst into political advocacy and specifically into issues of election integrity.
Oh, 100%. I was already concerned, but after that selection, that election, watching them stopping the count and, everything that we all witnessed, it's like, my gosh, we are in a very, very serious situation. I can't believe this is happening in America. And my discernment, my gut just told me that this was so nefarious and so wrong on so many levels. And we had never seen, at least in my lifetime, I had never seen anything quite like it. I mean, you have hanging chads in Florida, back in the day, and we know now that ushered in the machines. That was all part of the ploy.
No.
So, Christopher, yes, that was my first real, I've got to do something. My hair was on fire, just like Katie's was. And we started going to the Capitol almost daily and just trying to figure out what we could do as regular citizens to enact change. And as you well know, our listeners may not, because you started coming with us, Christopher, those elected officials that sit in our legislature, and I'm not generalizing, there are really a handful of really good ones. They're not very many. But for the majority, for the most part, it's a bunch of rhinos and it's a bunch of people who just don't do a thing, nothing. And you elect them thinking, well, they're going to go and, they're going to be my voice and vote the way that the people want them to vote. Well, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, that was a rude awakening for all of us, no question about that. And then you joined the Louisiana Federation of Republican Women at some point in time therein.
That's right. So Katie and I both decided, we had a friend who had mentioned to us, if you want to do something, there's a good group, a statewide group. It's called the Louisiana Federation of Republican Women. They have two local chapters in Baton Rouge, and you should get involved with them. So Katie and I were like, that's a great idea. So we did. We joined the East Baton Rouge Republican Women, and we quickly got very involved with them. We found out subsequent to our great involvement that we were kind of a handful again of ones that were really involved, and the rest sort of just want to have lunch on a Thursday 1 month. Each month they have lunch and they have cake and coffee, and then they don't talk politics until the following month when they have cake and coffee and lunch. And so we were more activists.
And do nothing in between.
I don't want to generalize because there's some great chapters of the Republican women who are very active. But it's more philanthropical. It's more, they help out the community. They're not really that involved with any sort of political endeavor other than to promote or support, I should say, candidates. They just give support to all of the Republican candidates, and that's about it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So during your time as part of the Republican women's group, you were still working on the election integrity issue. And I think you have a great story, because I've definitely heard Katie retell the story, and I'd love to hear you do it, of learning more about the actual vulnerability in the Louisiana voting system.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, for 2.5 years, we worked both privately and professionally with our Secretary of State on election fraud. It was actually our group that brought him the information about ERIC, which, if you don't know what ERIC is, it's a voter roll, quote unquote, cleaning system that 32 states are contracted with. And Louisiana was one of those states. What ERIC actually does, it's George Soros funded, and it takes the names that it gleans from those voter rolls and it uses them to cheat. And we found that out. So we brought that information to our Secretary of State, who immediately said, well, if that's the case, I need to do my own due diligence and we need to sever ties. So he did, and then he did sever ties for the state of Louisiana. Louisiana at the time was the very first state to do that, Danielle. So it was quite a big deal.
Wow. And it did. It made national news. In fact, it happened here in Terrebonne, I believe, or at least he announced it in Terrebonne.
Yeah, he did. He announced it in Terrebonne. That's right. So tomorrow we leave to go to, or I leave, some of our group is already there, to go to Missouri for Mike Lindell's Election Integrity Summit. a year ago, our same group was there, and our Secretary of State was being touted as a rock star. Because when you're at this summit in Missouri, you're introduced, you say, hey, oh, you're California. Oh, we're Louisiana. Oh, you're Louisiana. You have that amazing Secretary of State who got out of Eric. I wish our Secretary of State was just as good and did things like that. He's a hero, you know. And I can remember calling Kyle from Missouri and saying, you know, you are just on fire here. I wish you could be here. And so fast forward to a year later, and tomorrow we leave for that same event, and our Secretary of State is no longer a rock star. In fact, we found out that he was the co-chair, as Randy Russ mentioned on your show, of the CIS portal that surveils law-abiding citizens. And he's pretty proud of it. He's on video saying that he's proud of being the co-chair of that enterprise. So you were asking about the story that really is quite damning, in my opinion. We had all those national experts with which we were working during the time that we were working with Kyle. And there was one specific instance where Dr. Douglas Frank, who, if you don't know who he is, your listeners, he is a Nobel laureate mathematician and cyber data analyst. And he's a very faithful man. You know, it's one of the things, a little aside here, all of the groups, it seems, that are working on the election integrity and working just in different capacities that are, you know, they're all trying to, the one objective and goal is to save our nation. The common thread seems to be that we're all faith-filled. Just our eyes are always on God. And I do believe that's why, if in part we've had successes, it's due to that. It's due to our faith.
Yep.
I really believe that.
I do too.
And Christy, I will tell you that there's no doubt that the experience that you're going to describe to our listeners that occurred at your house, which is just so revealing and so stunning, there's no question that that was the Holy Spirit revealing truth to you in that moment. Tell us about what happened. I can't wait any longer. What happened at your house?
And you already know the story. I need to stop being so long-winded. Okay.
Yes, but you always tell it so well.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, we sat in the dining room, Dr. Frank, Kyle Ardoin, and myself, where Dr. Frank schooled our Secretary of State. He knew a lot of it, but Dr. Frank gave him a broad overview and very specific details as well on the fraud in our nation and specifically in our state, because we had gotten those experts, as I said before, to do a deep dive on Louisiana's elections. And after the 6 hours, Dr. Frank asked for our Secretary of State's permission to have a white hat hacker, a good guy, attempt to hack into our election management system in real time. And our Secretary of State granted the permission, and the hacker was successful in 3 minutes.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I think if you've listened to the previous episode with Dr. Russ, you heard that my sister is in IT security, and she just came back. I picked her up from the airport yesterday from DEF CON, where they hacked the election systems, and they've done it for years. And it would not surprise her in the least. And even in the clip that I shared, I think it took an 11-year-old 5 or 8 minutes to get into an SOS system. So it's just remarkable. And what happened after Secretary of State Ardoin saw that the system was hacked with such ease?
Well, he was visibly shocked. Visibly shocked. He literally looked up at the ceiling, put a hand on each side of his face, and said, "Oh my gosh, I guess that's what I needed to hear." You know, and this is after we had brought him so many other things, but this was a hack into his system in real time, in quick time. And, you know, for them to say that, you know, we're not connected, because thereafter he was going around the state saying, oh, our machines are never connected to the internet. Well, they don't have to be connected to the internet. I mean, how dumb does anyone think we have to be to believe that that's the only way that these machines can be hacked? And Dr. Russ has gone into much detail about that, so I won't.
And Chris, I'll tell you this also, that Dr. Haldeman also testified at the Louisiana Voting System Commission that it's not necessary for the system to be connected to the internet. That's one of the biggest misnomers. I'm so glad that you clarified that based on your own study and experience in this. That is not a prerequisite to being able to hack into the system.
That's exactly right. We know that. And just really quickly, whenever you talk about in Louisiana, a deeply red state, you talk about election integrity and you say that we have problems. The majority of people who don't know any of it say to you, if they're conservative, well, Trump won. Our Republicans won. What are you talking about? We don't have any election fraud. Well, we know for sure that they did win, but they won by much greater percentages than they were given. That is how they flip red states blue. It's a long, slow cheat. And then when the state flips from red to blue, everyone says, well, we saw it coming because our Republican candidates were losing percentages over the years. No, they were being stolen.
And the real target of a lot of these elections is the primary. It's not the actual election day election.
It's exactly right.
Christy, that's such a great point that you make. I call it death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
It's a gradual, incremental theft of our state is what is occurring. And they're smart enough not to do it precipitously. They're smart enough not to do it suddenly because they know that people will catch on to it. So they're patient enough to do it gradually.
Well, that's exactly right.
And incrementally. And another point, I'm so glad that you brought that up, that they're just because Donald Trump won Louisiana by 60 percentage points does not mean that he didn't have votes shaved off. And slowly but surely, they're going to take it over that way. And then people look up and say, yeah, well, no shock there. This state's been going blue, sadly enough, for 10 years, 15, 20 years. And so people don't know what's going on.
To that point that, we're a deeply red state. So why do we have a Democratic governor?
Thank you.
Well, there was the matter of those little 40,000 votes that in Orleans Parish, and I won't go into that. Let's just leave it there.
Well, maybe just bringing us back to the story, Can you tell us what happened with Ardwan after he saw this and after he had the shock of his life? What did he do about it?
Well, so we brought him everything that he needed to do, pretty much like bullet points. Here you go, because this is not what we said to do, but what the national experts all agreed was the proper, like a checklist. I'm a former flight attendant. Pilots have checklists. They follow the checklist point by point. They don't skip from number 1 to number 20. They have to do every single number. And that makes sure that our airplane has integrity. That makes sure that our airplane is safe. They don't skip any points. So basically, these national experts gave our Secretary of State a checklist and said, put these things into play and we will be on the road to safe and secure elections. And so we really were thinking that he was doing that, Danielle. We did. We thought he was continuing to work with us. So what happened post the meeting in my dining room, there was a convention of the Louisiana Federation of Republican Women in Lafayette. And I, at the time, was the fundraising chair of the Louisiana Federation of Republican Women. And there was a woman there who wanted, and she did, to set up a table at the convention with a petition to keep the voting machines. And so I was asked by another member of the Federation to please tell what I knew about the voting machines and about, the situation, because people don't know. So I used my time as the fundraising chair, the time I got that I was allowed to speak, to talk about the story or to tell the story that transpired at my dining room with our Secretary of State. And the following week, I got a phone call from the Region 6 Vice President saying that the executive board of the LFRW said that I had thrown our Secretary of State under the bus, which of course I didn't do. I just told the factual story. So post that situation, there was a meeting of the East Baton Rouge Republican women, of which at the time I was the vice president, and they were having meetings without me. I was part of the executive board, but they were having secretive meetings whereby they signed non-disclosure agreements, and you just can't make this stuff up.
Just for the benefit of our listeners, the East Baton Rouge Parish Republican Women is a chapter is a member itself of the LFRW, correct?
That's right, Christopher. Yes, the LFRW is the state federation. And within that state federation, there are many chapters all over the state. And the East Baton Rouge chapter is only one.
So you became persona non grata.
Well, I did, but I didn't realize how egregious of persona non grata I became until in January. Katie and I and Representative Kathy Edmonston was in my car. We were riding to our January East Baton Rouge Republican Women's meeting. And my phone was blowing up, and it was people telling me that Debbie Keeney, who is the Region 6 Vice President of the LFRW, was sitting outside of the meeting place with 6 police officers. And so I thought, my goodness, this is really, and they said it's to, keep you out, you and Katie. We had gotten emails. Katie and I both got an email from the Federation saying that our interest in the Federation, while they appreciated it, our membership request had been denied. Well, at the time we got those emails, we were members in good standing. And I will say now that I never, nor did Katie, break any bylaws. And to this day, I have had no due process. I've never been able to tell my story or to even have my accusers tell me what I did wrong. They have just canceled me, and I'll tell you how they did that. So we show up at that meeting and we go in to sign in and to pay our dues for, the year. That's what everybody does. You show up at the January meeting, you pay your dues for the year. Well, this big sheriff came in and he said, "Ma'am, you can't be in here." And he grabbed Katie and I and didn't grab us. He indicated that we needed to step outside. So we did. And I said, "Officer, I'm sorry. Why can't I be here?" And he said, "Because you're not a member." And I said, "Well, we actually are members." I said, and I'm the vice president of this chapter. And he said, "Nope, your membership expired in December." And for everything that we said, he had an answer. I said, "Gentlemen, if come to find out later, it was 3 captains and 2 lieutenants of the sheriff's department. That's some pretty big firepower for 2 little women." So I gathered them around and I said, "Gentlemen, I first of all just want to thank you for your service, because I know that you're underpaid, overworked, and underthanked. And we are very grateful for what you do for our community every day. But I also, in the same breath, have to apologize to you because you have been used by a handful of women in that room as political pawns." And they just looked at us. And, I gave them a little bit about what was going on. And I said, "They are censoring and suppressing law-abiding citizens' free speech." They just couldn't believe it. And so there had been a threat called in against the East Baton Rouge women, and we were the threat. And so I said, "Do we look dangerous?" And they said, "No." And I said, "Well, but our words could potentially be dangerous to a certain elected official."
Wow. So you, Christy, you and Katie, my wife,
That's right.
were kicked out of the LFRW because you simply spoke the whole truth about an experience that you had that exposed the acute vulnerabilities of our machine voting system in Louisiana. You simply spoke the truth.
Absolutely.
And for that, you were suppressed and you were kicked out of the LFRW for that reason.
Well, I have to assume that that's the reason, because no other reason at all was given to either Katie or myself for being kicked out. No reason. We got no reason. We were just held out with police force from our meeting, just like CCP China or Gestapo Germany, the tactics that they would employ to censor free speech. That's what happened in East Baton Rouge on January 26th of this year.
Wow.
And these are people who are purportedly on the same side of the political spectrum as you. These people supposedly share your values. You don't have to agree on everything, obviously, but even just to have the right to disagree on a particular topic is very much American.
And the thing about it is, Danielle, this is not just another topic. This is the fundamental, the paramount issue of our day.
Exactly.
If we do not have secure elections, we don't have a republic. You would think that every concerned citizen would welcome Christie's information on that issue. You have a white hat hacker who's breaking into our voting system inside of 3 minutes, and they're shutting down the dissemination of that information in Louisiana. It is absolutely astounding to me. But you know what I find somewhat rewarding about this? Even though Christy and Katie got kicked out of the LFRW, I think they are getting the last laugh here, at least not that you're laughing at anybody, Christy, because I know you're way too humble for that, but you absolutely did not stay standing still. You moved on and you established another group not long thereafter.
Well, that's right, Christopher. One thing I neglected to mention that's quite important is that the newly elected president of the LFRW, right after that convention, sent out a letter to all of the chapters that comprise the LFRW. And the letter's contents named Dr. Randy Russ, John Scanlon, myself, Lennar Whitney, Brandon Trosclair, named all those people and said, do not invite any of these people to your chapters. And if you deign to do so, well, those weren't the exact words, but basically what she said, you will be subject to closure because the presentation that Dr. Randy Russ shows slanders our Secretary of State with propaganda, which is laughable. It's just beyond ridiculous because if everyone who knows Dr. Randy Russ knows that he's a very measured and factual person. He's not someone who is emotional. He's someone who delivers facts. He delivers them in a very measured way. And he is a calm person and he's a faithful man and he doesn't slander anyone.
Well, and Christy, exactly. And also let me decide for myself, right? I mean, thank you for taking the time to tell me what I need to think. That is so insulting.
That's right. So she lost a lot of members with that letter. And so she felt like in the day that we got kicked out, more than half of the East Baton Rouge Republican women walked out because they couldn't give a clear answer as to why we were held out by police force of our own club.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So the second letter that Robbie Dyer wrote was a letter of, quote, clarification because the first letter had been so upsetting to so many. And the letter of clarification really were all of Kyle's talking points. It couldn't have been more clear to me that he was the source for both of those letters because Robbie Dyer was never interested in election integrity prior to that moment when I got up and spoke.
Well, and it sounds like he's letting the Republican women of the state do his dirty work for him.
He absolutely is. I'm firmly convinced. I don't want to slander anyone. I became friends with him. I really like him as a person, but what he has done to this state and to the individuals in it, I don't even have words. I don't even have words. And as Christopher so eloquently stated, if we don't have election integrity, no other issue matters. Look at what we have installed in the White House right now. You think that was an election integrity situation? Do you think he really got more votes than any president in the history of our elections because he was so popular? He couldn't get 12 people to a rally.
You're so right, Christy. And I really appreciate the fact that you are so firm on not wanting to slander Kyle because I just think, we don't know the pressure a lot of these elected officials are under. We don't know the forces behind the scenes that are doing whatever. So we don't know what kind of realities these people are facing on a day-to-day. But at the same time, you put your hand on a Bible, you said an oath that you would confirm and do the duties of this office, that you would protect the sanctity of our elections. And at the end of the day, it's your obligation to do that.
That's right, Danielle. And I do believe that he's in a hard situation. I don't know what kind of situation exactly, but I do know that when Colonel Phil Waldron came here, he's Trump's former cybersecurity guy, to testify on our behalf at the Voting Systems Commission meeting, one of the meetings. I had him in my vehicle. He spent the night at my house. I had the great honor of putting him up one night. And so riding to the Capitol that next morning, I was telling him a story about an interview I had with a Panzer commander. He was a Panzer commander during World War II, and he was highly decorated. And I had asked that Panzer commander, this is 20 some odd years ago, when he was a very elderly man, if he knew what was happening in the concentration camps. And he said, you have to remember, I was in the Wehrmacht. I wasn't in the SS. He said, we did not know what was going on, but we knew it was something bad. He said, but what we did was we got our mission and we just carried it out because, and I interrupted him. I said, if you didn't, they would kill you. He said, no, they would kill our families. And I'm telling Colonel Waldron this story and he starts shaking his head. And I said, you don't even know what I'm going to ask you, but you know. And he said, yes, it happens in America every day.
Wow. That's so interesting. We have a situation now, Christy, where substantial numbers of Louisianans still really don't understand how vulnerable our system is. And thanks to good people like you, thanks to Louisiana Conservatives, your new group, more and more people every day are becoming aware of the vulnerabilities that you've been talking about here. Let me ask you this. I know you're following the Secretary of State's race now. I've told Danielle and I've said on our show that I think that is the most important contest in the state right now, even more important than the governor's race, more important than the attorney general's race. Because again, if we don't know that our vote is registering our intent, then we don't have a republic anymore. So in that context, what are your thoughts on the Secretary of State's race? Is there a candidate in the race that you think does have an appreciation and understanding of these issues? And then what is the solution to the problem?
Absolutely, Christopher. Thank you for bringing that up. So after Katie and I were censored, we formed a new organization called Louisiana Conservatives. And I'm getting to the candidate, but this organization is to have a chapter in all 6 congressional districts of the state. And those chapters are about to pop up. We're almost ready. The goal is we are going to write legislation. We are going to take the power back from the government that has so insidiously crept over to them throughout our lifetimes and before. And that's not how our founding fathers intended it for it to be. That's topsy-turvy world. We're supposed to control our elected officials, not vice versa. So we want to, in Louisiana Conservatives, write legislation and bring it to legislators who are conservative, and they have to adhere to the 7 principles of conservatism, and they will sponsor that legislation, and hopefully it will be enacted into law. So backing up, our goal is election integrity, getting someone in the office. First of all, the number one goal is to get someone into the Secretary of State's office, because as you said, Christopher, nothing else matters if we continue to have unsecure or insecure elections. Brandon Trosclair is the only candidate for Secretary of State who is even saying that there's anything wrong with our elections. He is acutely aware of the problem. We've been working with him since we found out that Kyle was no longer working with us. Brandon Trosclair has already been a warrior for the people because he sued the Biden administration. He's a businessman and he has about 800 employees. And when Biden administration mandated the vaccine for workers and companies, he sued the regime, the Biden administration, and he thought he would be one lawsuit out of hundreds, but he was one of 6. And his case went all the way to the Supreme Court and he won. It's estimated that Brandon Trosclair saved an 80 million jobs nationwide. So he has already fought for the people. He's unafraid. He's unafraid. He knows what it's going to take. And he's been going around the state working tirelessly to bring the message to the people and to show them how we can have hand-marked, secure paper ballots counted on election day with the results delivered that night. And people don't think it can be done. It's being done. It's being done in other countries. It's being done right now in Missouri, Osage County, Missouri. There are places all over the country that have implemented this hand-counted paper ballot system. And it's as secure of a system as any that you could have. No machines.
And it's being demoed, Christy. It's being demoed now.
That's right. That's right.
Around the state, Dr. Russ and you and others are going around the state demonstrating the simplicity of the process, the accuracy of the process, and the transparency of the process.
That's exactly right. It's so simple. And, the clerks of court, bless their hearts, they are very against this hand-marked secure paper ballot system because, as one of the clerks testified at the VSC commission, we can't have paper ballots. My fingers will bleed if we have to count paper ballots.
Unbelievable.
Well, they've been trained by the federal government. Our clerks, our registrars, their training comes from the federal government. It has our elections after Obama and Biden declared elections critical infrastructure when they were president and vice president. That was when the federal government took over our elections. And, on the face of it, you think, well, shouldn't our elections be critical infrastructure just like our nuclear power plants? Well, not when the federal government deems, that they can take over and control those elections. So the training that all of our elected officials have gotten who deal with elections comes directly from the federal government. So That training tells them, this is what you do. Trust the process. Just trust the process. Well, so that's what they say. We trust the process.
The process that's completely out of our hands and that we can't see, and we wouldn't
Absolutely.
understand if we could see it, not because they're not smart people, but because they're probably not coders.
That's it.
Exactly. And we trusted the process.
Why do we need code to count 1 + 1 + 1 + 1?
Exactly.
You know, it's funny, Christy, they talk about trusting the process. I'm very willing to trust the process until someone sits in the living room of a friend of mine and hacks into our voting system database in 3 minutes. And then guess what? I don't trust the system anymore at that point. I'm sorry. Just like I don't trust the science anymore. When they
Exactly.
trust the science, when the evidence more and more is coming out about the harm, that's what we're talking about today, but the harm of this vaccine.
That's
It's like,
right.
Christy, you've given such a good explanation here indirectly by explaining what produces these leaders and these bureaucrats. You've really given insight into why there's so much institutional resistance to something that, to me, is so glaringly obvious that it's a no-brainer. We got to get rid of these machines. We don't have any choice. We have to do it to secure our system. And yet it's like the layers of bureaucratic resistance are just staggering.
It's remarkable.
If they think if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, it's extremely broken. Mike Francis, who's running against Brandon for Secretary of State, that's what he said. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I like Mike. That's his motto.
Wow.
So we really do have to do everything that we can, that the listeners can, if they care about secure elections, to get Brandon Trosclair elected. Because in my opinion, that is the only way moving forward that we can have a chance.
Yeah, it's that critical.
It's that critical. We're looking into the abyss. And if America goes over the edge, there's nowhere else. There's nowhere else. I've traveled the world. There is nowhere else to go.
Yes. Once the government assumes power, it never returns it voluntarily. And we have to always remember that. Well, Christy, I have to tell you, I'm so impressed with the work that you're doing and the fact that you are out there opposing the status quo, getting the truth out through Louisiana Conservatives. And it's just such a privilege to be able to have you on the show. What is the best way, before we let you go, for people to support Louisiana Conservatives and to get involved with your group?
People can go to louisianaconservatives.com and you can get the latest information on the next meeting. That's the best way to do it. And just to follow us as far as the meetings go and when the next chapters are opening, and join us. And Christopher, I'll say this, and Danielle, no one has to be a Republican to join Louisiana Conservatives. They could be Democrat, they could be independent, they could be, no party, as long as they are conservative. And, there are the 7 core principles of conservatism on that you can find on the website. The website's under construction, so just bear with us. But it is definitely, I think, something that we're going to have great numbers around the state. And when we go to lawmakers, it'll be hard for them to look away. They will understand that we are taking back the power.
I love it. And
I love that.
And we will definitely include the website in the show notes. It's louisianaconservatives.com.
That's right.
Perfect. We'll make sure to do that.
I'm going to say this last thing because this is like the going away statement. Empowered individuals, not government, are the key to national salvation. So if you want to do something, stand up and do it. It's not hard.
Amen.
As your great friend, Christy, Father Mark Beard said and a great man in his last homily, get off the fence because Satan is sitting on the fence. Choose this day, as the Old Testament says, and which Father Beard was familiar with, I'm sure. Choose this day where you stand. Choose this day where you stand. Thank you for choosing to stand for freedom, Christy, and thank you for choosing to stand for the great United States of America. We can't wait to have you back on, and thank you for sharing some time with us today. God bless you.
God bless you, Christopher and Danielle, and thank you for all that you're doing to save our state and our nation. I'm so supportive of LaCag and everything that you've done, Christopher, and I will always be. And I'm spreading the word on your behalf as well. So thank you so much for the time today. I greatly enjoyed being with both of you. God bless.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. Have a great one, Christy.
You too, Danielle. Thank you.
Chris, she's such a warrior.
I'll tell you, what else can be said? It's so inspiring to be able to listen to someone like her, who we know has been publicly vilified, has been kicked out of the established Republicans women's group in Louisiana, the LFRW, and did nothing except turn right around and start her own organization, Louisiana Conservatives, which is growing, increasingly vibrant. What a great organization for LaCag and the State of Freedom to be allied with.
Yes, I completely agree. And, you know, as she was just talking about the 7 principles of conservatism and that you don't need to be a Republican to be a member of her group, I was just struck because it seems like the Republican groups, because of the name Republican, tend to prop up the rhinos. And maybe that's part of a structural problem, right? Because they exist to support a party. But at the end of the day, it needs to be values-based. It doesn't need to be letter-based.
Exactly. In other words, it doesn't mean anything to be a Republican, then why are you a Republican?
Exactly.
And unfortunately, Danielle, on so many different things, perhaps more on the national level, but really, honestly, in our state as well, there are increasingly few real substantive differences between the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. Sadly, too few stand up for traditional principles of constitutional governance. And Louisiana Conservatives is doing that. And I'm just really thankful to have had Christy on the show.
Yeah, she's doing incredible work, and we just owe her a debt of gratitude and everyone that she's working with on the election integrity issue, because until we get this right, nothing is going to resolve itself.
Exactly. Before we go today, I simply want to remind our listeners to subscribe and share the State of Freedom, www.freedomstate.us. Support our show through advertising or donations, and continue to share. The goal, Danielle, as you know, is to broaden the platform of the State of Freedom all across Louisiana, and we are moving in that direction very, very rapidly. Also, Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, LaCag, we are at the Capitol during the legislative session. We're exposing the rhinos. We're elevating the constitutional conservatives. And I'm just thrilled to be working with you, thrilled to have a small part in returning our state to Louisiana and preserving the state of freedom in Louisiana.
I am as well. Have a great afternoon, Chris.
God bless you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.